Hi, I'm Penny, and I'm the pastor of Trinity United Methodist Church. It is early Sunday morning, and I am standing in a graveyard. It is dark, and it is creepy, but this is where the story begins. It started off great last week. There was a parade, and there were palms, and there was laughter. Jesus shared a big meal with his closest friends and disciples, but then something went horribly wrong. One of Jesus' dear friends, Judas, betrayed him. Peter denied him. There was a horrible trial that was unjust and unfair, and Jesus was publicly executed in the most violent manner possible. His body was laid in a tomb, and his friends and the disciples just scattered. But the women who had been at the foot of the cross, went home to mourn. They went to prepare spices, and early one morning after the Sabbath, they came back to anoint Jesus' body. This is how Luke tells the story. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, the women came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified, and they bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified and on the third day rise again?" Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all of this to the 11 and to the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. Can you imagine? A group of women came to the graveyard in the dark to anoint the body of their dead friend and brother, and when they looked into the grave, all they saw was an empty space where the body was supposed to be. Must have been incredibly terrifying and creepy. Depending on your Bible translation, it says the women were puzzled, perplexed, wondering. I love the honesty of that statement. The women were perplexed. Most of us do not do well with perplexed. We want answers, definitive answers. Will my marriage make it? Is my business or my job going to survive this crisis? Will the scientists find a vaccination? Is my family going to be okay? Why is this happening? How is this all going to turn out? We stare into the empty tomb, desperate to make sense of life and death, looking for answers. The women stood at the tomb, stared into the emptiness, and did not know what to make of it. This is where we enter the Easter story. We have questions. We doubt and we cry. We rail against the darkness. We are terrified of the future. Our best hope may already be dead and buried. We stand at the tomb with the women, trying to figure it all out. But what the women didn't know is that the resurrection had already happened. The rules of the game had already changed. A terrible and final ending had just been changed into a spectacular new beginning. They just didn't know it yet. That Jesus that they were mourning had already been given a new life, had already been transformed and resurrected. God was already making a new beginning. The women just didn't know it yet. And that new beginning that God had in mind for Jesus, God had a new beginning in mind for the disciples as well, including the women. All of those disciples that were afraid and anxious and fearful and angry and sad, God was about to make them bold preachers and teachers and leaders. A spectacular future was just around the corner. Something unimaginable, something good was already beginning to take shape. They just didn't know it yet. So they stood at the empty tomb in the dark, confused and perplexed. God works the night shift. God does his best work in the dark before we're aware or awake. When the sun is hidden and all hope is gone, God is already at work, bringing a new beginning and a new life. You don't have to believe it yet. Certainly the disciples and the women didn't believe it at first. Sometimes it's hard to see God at work, especially when it's dark, especially when we have so many questions. But we know how this Easter story ends. God always has the final say. The worst thing is never the last thing. God always bats last. I know this has been a difficult week for many of us, and it might get even more difficult from here. People are scared and afraid and wondering. People have lots of questions that are unanswered. We don't know how all of this is going to turn out, except we kind of do. Because we know what the Easter story is. We know what Jesus is doing, even when we're afraid, even when it's dark. That's why on this Easter morning, we stand in the graveyard as people of faith and we boldly proclaim, Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah. Amen.